You're listening to theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
Hello and welcome to another podcast from SeaKayakRoutes.com. I'm Simon Willis, and this interview is all about free money. Well, ish. On this website you can listen to all sorts of exciting expeditions being discussed. You might even want to organise one yourself. And you wonder, can you get sponsorship? How do you go about doing it? Well, Bob Campbell is the marketing director for Prana and P&H Kayaks, and I caught up with him at the Plasy Brennan Expedition Symposium just after he ran a session about how to get sponsorship, how you approach him, what he needs to know, and what he wants in return. Of course, there is another way to get money out of him.
They steal into the office and steal my credit card and then they're away. Sponsorship for trips is quite hard. There's very little financial sponsorship because, in all respect, the industry isn't that big and the budgets aren't big enough to allow for multiple trips to take money away. So the help people are going to get really falls into equipment and other types of assistance.
Okay, and how do they approach you? And how many of these do you get?
Well, I mean, on average, I'll get 3 or 4 a week, sometimes more in the summer, and generally they're fairly low quality, and it's really because people just don't know what we're looking for. They don't understand the format that we're looking for, and they underestimate or overvalue some of the things they're doing.
So what do you need to be told?
They should think of it almost like a CV. So if they imagine they're applying for a job and look at it from that point of view, then there's some sort of key things that need to happen for them. So starting off is the outline of what they're going to do. So to let us know when it's going to happen, we need to know that we've got time to work together to publicise the trip and to organise it and to make things happen, so that we're working in correspondence with them. We don't need to know that your trip's happening next Wednesday. We can't put that together. So realistically, for any normal kind of kayaking trip, about 3 or 4 months is about the minimum time we need to get effective coverage out of it, bearing in mind that any of the magazine coverage, it's going to take us 2 or 3 months to get that. After that, we need to know what it is they're going to do. What's the aim of the trip? What's unique about that trip? What's different about that trip as opposed to the other 5 that I've got on my desk that week or whatever. And that doesn't have to be the hardest crossing, the biggest trip or the largest waterfall or whatever it is. It just has to be different and unique. So it might be a group of people going off to do something they've never done before. It might be a group of sea kayakers crossing a lake. It might be a bunch of surf kayakers doing a sea crossing.
But it's got to have that story about it, that element of difference.
It needs to have the potential to be different. It's never different, and the story isn't there until they come back. But it has to have the potential of, here's a group of people going off to do something that is actually quite different. It's not just another trip. After that, we need to look at where they're going. Why are they going to that river, that lake, that mountain, that area on the coast? Why are they doing that crossing? What's so special? And maybe that's where the challenge is. The challenge might actually be just getting there. For example, the first Everest expedition, the whitewater trip that went, they drove there. So they drove from the UK to Everest. Now, that was probably one of the hardest parts of the whole trip, was actually just getting to the place to start the trip in the first place. So quite often, where you're going can be just as important, and that can be part of the challenge.
Actually, I've had one of those. Getting back from somewhere was an absolute nightmare, but that's different. I got a good story out of it, though.
Yeah, exactly. That's, they build into the whole picture of the story is getting there and getting back. Sometimes can be as much fun and as interesting to other people as the actual thing you're doing while you're there.
Actually, that's a point, because that piece I'm talking about, that led to a page in the Sunday Times, in the travel section. So actually, I hadn't thought about that. You're right, yeah.
That's exactly it. That's the hook that sometimes the bigger media, the general media, pick up on. They know a little bit about kayaking and canoeing, but it's the other life stories that they can build into it. Dramatic stuff, interesting stuff, funny stuff, sometimes sad stuff as well. But that's the thing that will get them interested, and quite often gets you the coverage that you never realised you were going to get in the first place. The next thing that we want to know is why. What's the challenge in this? And again, it doesn't have to be the hardest gnarliest thing to be done in the world, it can be a challenge for the people who are on it. It might be something like taking a group of blind people on a very short paddle. That will be a huge challenge for them. Or taking a group of young people on a challenge. The challenge can be related to the people that are going on it. And then that leads on to, lastly, who's going on the trip, what's special about them, why are they going, what's their experience. And all that needs to be, brief but concise enough so we can understand who's on it, what they're doing, and what their roles are as well. It's a team thing. What is each person going to be responsible for?
Right, so that's the stuff you need, and you sum it up there quite clearly. When, what, where, why, and who. And this is all part of the presentation you've just given here down in Plasy Brennan. So now the next bit of it, which I'm reading from the sheet we have in front of us, is what do you want? Now that's you as in the person who's going on the trip. You actually have to ask for that, do you? You can't just assume you know what it is.
This is a really, really important piece of information that we very, very rarely get. And you can understand why we rarely get it, because if it was me asking for sponsorship, I want someone to pay for my trip and provide all the equipment so it doesn't cost me anything. So you always feel a little bit cagey about saying I want this, because if you don't say anything, you might get more. But what that actually means is there's a big piece of blank paper in front of me, and I haven't got time to work out what it is you want. So if you don't tell me what it is that you're looking for, I can't decide for you what it is. And I don't have the time to suddenly go, well, what do they think they might need? Do I need to pay for their airfares or whatever? And you run the risk of, you'll always feel a little bit worried about doing that, because you think, oh, well, they're not going to be interested. Well, it's better that we know that from day one than doing it 2 weeks down the line when I've got interested in it, and all of a sudden you go, actually, I want £10,000.
But you might be tempted to ask for too much. You might be frightened that, will be interested enough if I ask for this, we'll just bin my... Or would you come back to someone and say, look, you've asked for 5 boats, we're sorry, we're not in the business of that, we could lend you them, perhaps? Is that the sort of thing you might do if it interests you?
Yeah, that is. I always try, unless it's an absolutely ridiculous request, I always try and get back to people and give them some feedback, even if I'm not interested in being involved with the trip. I'll try and explain to them why I'm not interested in their trip, what they should do to improve their, if you like, their CV for their trip, and also, if I can, I try and point them in another place where I think they might be successful. At the end of the day, I don't want to stop people going on trips. Likewise, we can't support every trip that goes, and we have our own needs.
But the thing about that is asking, yeah?
Yeah, you have to ask, and you need to be, again, using this word realistic about what you're going to achieve. So what is it that you want to get out of it? If you're quite happy to... If you're working within the kayak industry, realistically, you're going to get loaned equipment. You might get given equipment to use if it's a really good trip. You might get help getting that equipment somewhere, but you're unlikely to get a blank check or a lump of money, unless you're doing something really, really special and different.
To be fair, that's true across the whole of the outdoors industry. I've come across this. Even big people like Berghaus and Patagonia, they're not going to be throwing money at you unless you're Alan Hinks, frankly.
Exactly, yeah. Those trips, I would say, those sort of trips that are worth spending and having the ability to spend money come along sort of once every 15 or 20 years. They're really special, unique trips. They're not everyday occurrences.
Okay, other assistance. Now, this is the thing that gets overlooked a bit. Now, I found this very interesting part of your presentation, so let's go into that. Yeah,
this is... people don't... I don't think they ignore it. I think they just underestimate the help that we can give. On a regular basis, I'll have contact with 20 or 30 people in different continents all over the world, because we supply products all over the world. So now I've got an ability, if you want to get 9 sea kayaks to, I don't know, Australia, New Zealand, whatever, I've got people I work with on a weekly basis down there that I can talk to. We send containers of products all over the world, as do all the other manufacturers. Well, why don't we move your kayaks for you as part of that assistance? Now, that might actually cost us quite a lot of money. So again, we're not giving you the money to go and do your trip, but we might be providing you with a huge amount of support. That can range into several £1,000s in terms of shipping, providing equipment, and getting it around the place for you.
And if you've never shipped kayaks, and an expert has, well, why reinvent the wheel? I mean, that's hugely important.
Yes, I mean, that we do this every day. Our business is building and shipping kayaks, whether it's sea kayaks, open canoes, or white water boats. And obviously, we're shipping quite a lot of them, so we have contacts within shipping agencies that they know what a sea kayak is, they know what an open canoe is, and we can use those contacts to find out how we get your stuff to your location where you're doing your trip, and make it as efficient and as cost effective as possible.
And of course, you'll have had dealings with expeditions, you'll have contacts with other expeditions. People may have been, if not to that precise place, into the area before, so you could put people in touch with those people or local contacts?
Yes, exactly. That again, a resource that's there. I mean, really, you can go on, Google search will give you a list of people who've done trips before, but again, we know people personally that might have been to the area, might have done the same sort of trip, might have tried to do a trip and failed, and have very good feedback for you. So again, we can put you in contact with people that have that information for you.
Well, we're in the car park here at Plazy Brennan, which explains why the motorbike behind us has just started up instead of having the nice bird sound and the river going past us. But there we go. Let's keep moving on now. This is the bit that you get. What is the return for the company? This is your bang for the buck, yeah? Yeah,
like everything in life, very little of it's actually free. We're going to want something back for this support and help that we're going to give you. And it falls into some fairly easy categories. The first one is association with the trip. If it's a major trip, it's a big thing that's going to happen. If it's one of these once in 10-year type trips, then just being associated as a brand is really quite important, because those trips will be remembered and looked at, for years and years to come. So being part of that there's value built into that, so that can be useful. But again, that's only really for major trips. That's like I say, for these one-off, once every 10-year type trips. We can get imagery from you, so you're going to send photographs or whatever back in. Now, with that, it's important that someone on the trip is the photographer, and it's their job to make sure they know what sort of shots we're looking for, what formats we want them in, and what we're going to use them for, because that dictates how you're going to frame the shot and what sort of shots you want to get. What we don't want to do is receive a CD after your trip with 300 of your holiday snaps on, which have absolutely no use to us whatsoever.
But this is an important thing, that if you sponsor the photographer could end up in your boat taking pictures of people who are not in your boat. This is very true of equipment manufacturers as well. If you're supplying the guy who's wearing the gear, or the woman who's wearing the gear, and you're taking photographs of other people, that's blooming useless for you.
Yeah, this is probably the most commonly made mistake about trips, because most trips have they'll have 3 or 4 different sponsors, or they'll have people on who are sponsored by different companies, or who just prefer different types of boats, and that, there's nothing wrong with that. But quite often the person who'll come to us and ask for sponsorship will say, oh yes, I can get you loads of photographs, and then when I actually start talking to them, I say, well, who's going to take the photographs? Well, I've just bought a new camera and I'm going to do it. So you're going to take photographs of everyone else in their boats. Who's going to take photographs of you? Oh, well, I'll get one of my mates to try and do it. And that just never ever works out, I'm afraid.
Yeah, the new camera thing would worry me as well, actually.
Yeah, and that's it. I think everybody's done it. You're going off on holiday. A week before you go, you buy a new camera. You have no idea how it works. You don't know what the settings are. You don't know how long the batteries are going to last. Generally, it's a recipe for disaster.
And you've also got to talk about getting that photography back to you, because it might be something. This web blog thing. Oh, is that where we're up to now?
Yeah.
Right. Let's move on to talk about that, because that's just explain how useful the internet is, but what you need to kind of feed that beast.
Yeah, the weblog thing's relatively recent, I guess. Within the kayaking industry, it's the last couple of years it's really taken off, and definitely this year it's been fairly huge for us. We've got a couple of our team sites now. On the P&H site, we're just about to launch PH Paddlers section, and we've got a team site on the Piranha site. And what they are is just blogs for team paddlers or people that we're associated with to come up and tell us what they're doing, put some photographs up. And the real key to that stuff is a little and often. So I'd rather I had 2 photographs and a paragraph of text every 3 or 4 days than nothing for 3 months and then 2,000 words and 50 photographs. And the reason for that is that the blog type sites are bringing in a lot of interest from people, and if you look at the stats, it's happening on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning when they're getting a little bit bored from work. They want to see what's going on in the kayaking world, and they'll log on to one of the blogs and just see. And so they've only got, realistically, a couple of minutes before the boss is going to walk past, or it's going to become too obvious that they're not doing their work. So it needs to be little snippets of information. And it doesn't have to be major things, missing the shuttle, not making the beach, whatever. That stuff's all interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a fully interactive moving map and all that huge experience.
No, it's a short update of you. I'm sat in my office, bored at work. It's Tuesday morning. I've been following a get really for a couple of days. I want to see where you're up to and what you're doing. Right,
so it's important to have worked out how you're going to get that material back, presumably, not going over there with a 3G mobile phone to somewhere like Nepal and discover they don't have it.
Yeah, exactly. You need to work into the technical side of it, and obviously to do that you need web access. Most places you go to when you're travelling, you'll find somewhere with an internet cafe, or you can make a contact who's got an internet connection. And if you look into it, it's feasible. It needs a bit of planning and careful. We've just had a very successful trip, a whitewater trip, go out to Chile, which you would think wouldn't have great access. And they were logging on every 2 or 3 days, and we've just had some amazing feedback and footage and really good photography from those guys. So it is feasible. A little bit harder when you're on the sea, but again, you know, you're gonna come across fishing harbours. You know, there's going to be places where you can get the access.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But it's down to planning. I think you can do it. And even if, you know, it's not immediate, if it's a couple of days away, that's fine. But little and often is really, really useful. And if it is a really interesting trip and you are going to be out of contact for the next 3 or 4 days or the next week, then tell people, and then they'll wait, and you know, they're due back on next Wednesday. Let's click on and see what they've been up to.
Right, media plan. Let's talk about that. Explain.
Yeah, a media plan. Most people kind of look at you dumbly when you say, what's your media plan? And that really is, if you like, to put it in a basic form, it's a timeline of events that are going to happen. So if you're going away on your trip in this week and this month, then if we're going to get a press release in a magazine that helps publicise your trip, you know, we're working 2 months ahead of that, because that's how the magazines work. So 2 months ahead of that, we need to have photographs and information ready. So if we have a very simple timeline on a spreadsheet or a document, and we can see when things need to happen, and that's what I mean by a media plan. And then what that happens, I can coincide with my media plan for the brand of when I'm putting adverts in, when I'm doing, you know, product news releases, press releases for the magazines. I can make sure that we optimise our coverage that we can give to the trip as well. So it's really worth, and it doesn't have to be really complicated. It's just, like I say, a simple timeline of when you're going to do things. When are you going to be able to do the weblog updates? When are you going to be able to provide photographs? And they're not always going to be exact, because things are going to change, the weather's going to change, you're not going to get to where you want to go to, the computer doesn't work when you get there, whatever. But if we've got a target date that we're working to, then we can maximise our effort. You know, it's no good a magazine knowing that sometime in the spring you're going to send a report in.
Right. How much would you expect a prospective expedition member to go, or organiser be coming to you and saying, here's my media plan? How much are you saying, can you help me a little bit with this? Do you have much time to work with them on this or not?
We don't have a huge amount of time, but we can definitely give them some guidelines, and this is the sort of thing that we're looking at. And the standard templates that I use that I can email out to people and say, you know, take this, modify it, send it back to me. And there'll be times when they're doing things that I don't want to look at those products at that time of year. I want to do it at a second time, because I've also got to work with the sales guys in the company, because I'm providing media coverage when they're trying to sell products. So there's a commercial aspect that's in there, but if a trip's going to be successful, even if it hasn't got sponsorship, if it's going to go out and create media, there needs to be set deadlines when things are going to happen. So there needs to be a media plan. What's your plan of action for the media coverage?
Now, everybody presumably says to you, yeah, we're going to write up an article for Paddles magazines or Sea Kayak, or sorry, the Canoe and Kayak UK magazine or whatever, or the BCU mags, Canoe Focus and this kind of stuff. Scottish Paddler, let's not forget them, otherwise I get into trouble. That's great, but only to a certain extent for you, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, that stuff is interesting, because what it's doing is, you know, it's reinforcing the brands and the association with the trip that we talked about earlier, but its real value is not there. It fills up the magazines. You know, the magazines get oversubscribed with reports on trips and things, and it's nice to have, from my point of view, it's nice to have, you know, photographs of our boats in the magazine reports and people talking about doing trips using our products. But the real useful stuff for that, in terms of for paddle sport in general, is to take that information and put it in an in-flight magazine, put it in a lifestyle type magazine. Now that's obviously harder, but once you come back from your trip, you've got this great story with all the meat on, all the little things that happened, and quite often a journalist or a magazine editor will pick up on that and go, this is actually a really good story, and get good coverage, not only for your trip and the paddlers, but for the companies associated with it, but then also for paddle sport in general, and it's showing people the different aspects of paddle sport.
Because you're talking about specialist magazines having a circulation of what? Have you any idea roughly?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, the figures are somewhat exaggerated at times for them, but you're looking at about 20 to 30,000. There's a lot of magazines, kayak magazines. When you look at some of the other outdoor magazines, will print 60 or 70,000. You know, and when you go on to things like lifestyle magazines, you know, your FHMs, your Mary Claires, you're into hundreds of thousands of magazines. So the coverage is phenomenal, and that's without even looking at things like, you know, your Sunday broadsheet papers and things like that.
Well, how useful is local radio, regional telly? Because I know in those sort of figures for regional telly magazine, well, Reporting Scotland gets about 600,000 a night, so I figure that they must be more useful. Are they? But it's not as targeted a market, is it? It's
not as targeted, but it still takes paddle sport out. And the real key to the regional thing is to try and work that around, so that, for instance, say you were from northern Scotland and you were going to do something with a local radio or TV programme. why not do that in the local paddle sports shop car park? So now what we're doing is people getting possibly interested in paddle sport, and in the background is a shop that they know is in their location that they can go and talk about it and see it. So again, it's building in for the whole industry.
Well, if it's telly, they'll want you on the river or the sea, presumably, so to do that. But that's useful, is it? Trying to get the telemedia. Would you advise someone as to? I shouldn't have picked the car park. Should have? Would you advise someone as to how to go and do that kind of thing? You wouldn't think I did this for a living. Good God. Well, let me ask my question again. Would you advise someone as to how they should go about doing that and hitting a local telly, or was that just really up to them to try and be nice and approach people?
Yeah, it's hard because it depends whether there's no news days. I'm sure you know if
that is so true.
If the producer's scrabbling or the editors are scrabbling for news that day, then you stand a good chance for getting in. If there's been a major incident somewhere or something else going off that's more important, a politician's been found in bed with a small dog or something, then you're not going to get the coverage, I'm afraid. But unless you try, and really trying is making contacts, it's finding out the people. And I can't do that because I'm not in your region, so you've got to go and find who your local reporter is, who the local people involved with it are, and just nosy around. There'll be someone who'll know the person to ring up and go, hey, these people have been on a really cool trip, why don't you give them a bit of coverage?
Actually, frankly, it's not that hard, because you just need to watch them on the television, find out their names. It really is that easy, and if somebody's ringing up with a story, you want to take it. I speak from experience. Somebody rings me up with a story, I want to talk to them. Yeah. Anyway, listen, there's one other aspect of this which I also found particularly interesting, and that was when you come back, the overlooked bit. Now, just talk me through why that is so useful.
Yeah, this is a really important part of all trips, and it is probably the most overlooked aspect and value into supporting trips and providing assistance, is that when people come back, they have all this, before they go, there's just an idea, there's a concept, there's a potential of something happening. When they come back, there's all the flesh on the bones, there's things that happened, there's good things, there's funny things, there's achievements, there's failures, there's a real story there. And what people fail to do, because they come back and they've been away for 2 weeks or a month or whatever, they've not been at work, the wife's screaming at them because they haven't done the gardening, or their husband's annoyed because they have to do the shopping and look after their kids for 2 weeks, they get caught up with their day-to-day life and trying to get that back in order after their trip, and they fail to seize on all the media opportunities that are there when they come back, of going to their local canoe club and doing a talk, talking to local journalists, doing slideshows. They've got all this information and photographs and all this meat on the bones of the actual trip that they've done, and this stories and interest that's built in, and they fail to maximise it and go out and use it. And it's not that hard to do a slideshow around 4 or 5 shops in your area, canoe-related shops or canoe clubs, and, get close to making some money on it, because people will pay to listen to it.
I have to say, you have to set time aside for that afterwards. I speak as somebody who's doing quite a bit of travel writing, actually, for the Sunday Times, and you actually have to put the work starts when you get back. You actually have to put that time aside, give yourself a deadline to get your slideshow ready or your articles written, and not think that the work stopped when you got off the plane and you start planning the next one.
Yeah, that's it. You've got to build that in, and I think that's another important thing that I try and get across to people is, right from the very start, is what is the aim of this trip? What is it that you're doing? You're going to be under pressure of time, because we all are. You've took time off work, or you took time away from your family. Do you want to maximise your enjoyment of that? In which case, you probably don't want to be worrying about deadlines, taking photographs, writing articles. So you've got to be realistic about what you're doing. If you're doing something that's really quite different and unique, and you want to kind of go down in history for doing this, then great, put the time and the effort into doing it. If you want to go away and have a great 2 weeks paddling, then go and have it, but don't put all these extra pressures on yourself.
That's Bob Campbell. And the point about deciding whether it is worth the hassle of going through all the hoops you need to go through to get the sponsorship is really well made. You can hear more podcasts in the podcast library of seakayakroots.com. I'm Simon Willis. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Find out how easy it is to subscribe to all our free programs. Visit our website at theoutdoorstation.co.uk.